Do you ever wonder why certain situations activate a deep reaction in you, even when you can't connect it to a specific memory? Have you ever felt frustrated that you can't remember all the details of your past and your traumas? Have you avoided healing because you're scared of what you might remember if you really revisit your past? If any of those questions resonate with you, you're definitely not alone. In today's episode, we're going to challenge the myth that you have to remember everything in order to heal. Because recently, I'm bringing this episode to light because I've had suppressed childhood fears and repressed childhood trauma surface, and that's what I've been currently healing from. And I've been very mindful of not re-traumatizing myself by trying to recall every single detail of why I have those fears and what those repressed traumas are, because I repressed them for a reason. And so I thought that I'd do this episode about why we can heal without having to remember all the details of our past, because there is a misunderstanding about healing trauma. And many people believe, and many people teach, that you have to flush everything out about what happened in your traumas or in your adverse experiences in order to heal. But you actually do not have to. And often doing that or trying to force that is re-traumatizing when you're not adequately supported by trauma-informed practitioners and practices, and you're not fully resourced in yourself. So today we're going to talk about how deep transformation happens without full narrative recall through neuroscience, nervous system regulation, and somatic experiencing, because authentic and lasting healing is possible even when you don't remember all the details about what needs to be healed. Because your nervous system can reorganize itself and old emotional charges can dissolve, meaning they can be released, and safety can be created in the present moment by rewriting patterns from the past without re-traumatizing yourself. Welcome to The Simple Source, a paradigm-shifting space where self-love, healing, spirituality, and personal growth are redefined. If you've been told healing takes years, that abundance must be attracted, or that transformation requires struggle, you haven't been told the truth. I'm Linda Valines, a certified trauma-informed holistic coach, author, and spiritual guide. After healing myself from chronic conditions, complex trauma, and lack, not by following traditional frameworks, but by creating my own, I'm now teaching you to love, heal, and free yourself, mind, body, and soul, so you can reclaim your highest health, happiness, and potential with joy and ease. Each week, we go beyond surface-level self-help and into the real mechanics of transformation. If the traditional paths to healing and spirituality haven't produced the changes you want in the life you desire, you're in the right place. You were never meant to struggle or wait for what is already yours. Let's get started with today's episode. So if you've ever been frustrated that you can't remember your past, and you've been led to believe that you can't heal until you remember or you talk about everything in your past that hurt you, that caused you pain, that was traumatic, this episode is going to help you understand healing in a new way so that you can relax into your healing. You can feel more empowered and feel less pressured, because we can truly productively heal without having to recall all of our traumas specifically and in detail. And that's really important to understand, because we can only truly, genuinely heal when we are relaxed. Now, the truth is, again, you don't have to remember every painful detail in order to heal your pain. Your nervous system doesn't heal like a courtroom. I say this in my membership program. I say this in my book, but healing is not a court of law. It's not a courtroom. You're not being judged. There's no verdict. Blame does not help you heal, and you do not need to recount every single detail of every painful event to convince your brain and your body that you're safe now in order to regulate, in order to become coherent. You know, there's this myth that has been reinforced through some therapists and manifestation programs and self-help books and even in movies and television, that you have to dig through your memories and unearth all the terror and all the dark details in order to be truly free of your past. But real healing doesn't need to be that laborious. And for many people, trying to dig up everything is not only not necessary, it actually makes things worse. You don't need to create a perfect chronological file of every single moment of your life that's hurt you in order to heal. And we all need to understand that, because people get really stuck in their healing journey because it's like, I don't really know what happened, so I have to dig all of it up. I need to talk about every single detail. But that's not the case, because your body and your subconscious are already holding the imprint of the trauma, like in your nervous system, in your reflexes, in your emotional patterns. So why would they require you to consciously relive the moment in order to release the trauma? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, they don't. It's already present. The trauma is already present in your body. You don't need to relive it in detail in order to release it, because it's already part of your mind-body system if you haven't healed it. So let's start by asking, why does that myth, that misunderstanding even exist in the first place? Because that will kind of help dissolve why it's not true. So many people have this belief for a very long time that remembering and talking about all the details of your pain and your trauma is the only way to heal. So on the surface, it makes sense. And there are three sort of big reasons why that myth has been reinforced and why it is so seductive. Narrative coherence does give the brain closure, okay? Your brain loves a complete story, okay? And that's because the hippocampus, which is the part of your brain that organizes events into sequence, loves when things make sense. It's like when you finally finish a movie that you've been watching incrementally over a week. When you get to the end, your brain's like, oh, yes, it's over. We get what happens in the story. So that completion can feel like healing, even though your nervous system is actually still dysregulated underneath the narrative. And also storytelling does help things make sense mentally and also socially, right? Humans are wired for storytelling. It's part of how we make sense of the world. And so sharing your story can feel cathartic and can even invite empathy and support and connection. But being able to tell the story of your pain is often equated with bravery and also even validation. And that's the allure of I get this external validation. And so that makes my healing or what happened, quote unquote, real. And I actually talked about what happens when you overshare and you seek external validation for your healing in the previous episode, because many people believe that healing isn't valid unless it's externally validated, meaning shared, exposed. But we've been led to unconsciously think, right? If I can't remember it, then maybe it didn't happen. And if it didn't happen, then my pain isn't valid. And that belief can quietly hold people hostage to that myth that you have to remember everything about your past in order to heal and move on from your past. And also there's the cultural equation of the truth with full recall, right? That's our justice systems. That's journalism. That's, how history books are written. They all rely on detailed accounts as evidence. And so we're just conditioned to believe that we have to treat memory as the gold standard for truth. And so when we're missing pieces about our trauma or our past, we assume that we're missing our truth. And therefore, we're missing the path to freedom and to healing. But that's not true. Because really in healing, the nervous system and the brain, they don't work like a history book, certainly not a court of law. And so the actual science of memory, which we're going to get into more throughout this episode, especially when dealing with trauma, reveals that when something traumatic happens, your brain's primary goal is not to write a perfect story. It's not to formulate or retain a perfect story. Its primary goal is to keep you alive. That's the primary goal all the time. But when trauma is involved, that goal gets kicked up to red alert. This is what we're dealing with now and nothing else matters. And so when survival takes the lead like that, certain parts of your brain, like the hippocampus, can actually go partially or completely offline. And then other parts of your brain, like the amygdala, go into overdrive. And so that means that trauma often gets recorded not as a clear narrative, but like fragments and more specifically sensory fragments, like meaning like a smell or a flash of light or a flash of an image or a sound, and also like through somatic responses, meaning like flinching, bracing, freezing, or your gut tightening or your heart racing, okay? And also emotional charges get stored like fear, like shame, rage, without being attached to a specific narrative, meaning why I'm specifically feeling this emotion, okay? That connection sometimes and oftentimes isn't always there when trauma is happening. So this is what's known in neuroscience as implicit memory, okay? And implicit memory is stored in the body and also the subcortical brain regions, right? That means not in the conscious, story-based, and detailed logical part of your mind. Now that matters because the imprint of trauma is stored in implicit systems primarily, which means like trying to heal solely through explicit recall, like conscious recall is actually not productive and pretty exhausting, okay? Because you can't like talk about your trauma in detail. Like you have to really feel it somatically. And you can try to do that, which is why a lot of people spend years and years and years in talk therapy and still deal with trauma, right? You can talk about it all you want. You can try to remember all the details in order to understand exactly what happened. But what you really need to understand is that trauma is primarily stored in the body, right? Through implicit memories. And that's what you need to know in order to truly heal. And science shows that implicit imprints can be updated. This is key. It can be reorganized and also released without having to retrieve the full narrative because your nervous system does not need a transcript. Again, healing is not a courtroom, okay? But you do need new experiences of safety and regulation in the present moment in order to do that. So believing that you must remember everything to heal can actually have real adverse consequences because it can keep you stuck in that endless search for that quote unquote missing piece rather than really truly cultivating and maintaining safety and coherence in the present moment, which is key, right? And often what people do is they re-traumatize themselves. They keep themselves in dysregulated cycles because when you push yourself to relive what your system has wisely tucked away until there's enough safety to process it, it's actually very stressful for your mind-body system. And also, too, what happens is it can erode your own sense of self-trust because you start to doubt your own experience simply because you can't recall every detail. So yeah, that myth is very seductive because it does give the illusion of control, right? If I can just remember everything, then I can fix everything. That mentality is part of why people try to heal that way. But as we're going to get into throughout this episode, healing is not about recalling every detail of your past. It's not about rehashing your past over and over again. It's actually about updating the way that your body and your subconscious respond to the present in the present. And so that's what allows the past to no longer hijack your life and your sense of present felt safety, your vitality, your well-being. So now let's talk a little bit about the science of how trauma is actually stored and why the absence of memory doesn't mean the absence of healing. And so your nervous system doesn't store trauma like neatly labeled chapters in a book, okay? It's kind of stores it like scattered pages, and some of those pages are smudged, some of those pages are scorched, some of those pages are locked in a drawer you've never opened, and in a drawer sometimes you didn't even know existed. Now, most people think that memory kind of works like a video file, right? You can just press play. You can see the whole thing from beginning to end. You can rewind, stop, play a certain moment over and over again. But trauma doesn't work that way. When something overwhelming happens, your brain is not prioritizing storytelling accuracy, right? Again, it's prioritizing survival. And so that means that trauma disrupts how your memories are encoded. So what happens during trauma is that the hippocampus, again, the part of your brain that helps you create explicit memory, the type of memory that you have to consciously recall, meaning it's not automatic. That's the part of your brain, like I said before, that goes offline during high stress states. And so that's the part of your brain that's responsible for the linear story of the events of your life, like who was there, what happened first, what happened next, etc. Now, at the same time, implicit memory, which is your long-term memory, like the memory that is recalled unconsciously, right? Like how to ride a bike, how to drive a car, that is stored in the areas like the amygdala, okay? That remains online and that records sensations like reflexive responses, emotions, threat patterns. So that's why you might not remember the exact day that something happened, but your stomach, right, still clenches the same way every time you hear a certain tone of voice or you see a certain image. So that's basically what happens with your memory during trauma. Okay, so I explained it a little bit and then I explained it a little bit more. So let's talk about actually suppressing trauma versus repressing trauma, which can affect your memory recall or traumatic memories. So suppression is when you consciously avoid thinking about something, like choosing, not wanting and then choosing rather to change the subject or distracting yourself because a topic is too uncomfortable for you. So that's consciously suppressing a memory or an event. Repression with an R is not conscious, it's automatic, and it happens when your brain keeps certain memories or details of your past out of your conscious awareness because they would otherwise overwhelm your capacity to function properly, okay? Like not in constant survival mode. And so it's not a conscious choice. It's just an automatic built-in safety mechanism that happens without you doing anything consciously, okay? So that's repression. So that's why you can recall suppressed traumatic memories way more easily than repressed. So remembering that repressed memories is very important when you want to recall them. If you have a flash of something, this is what's been happening to me over the past couple of years, and then very aggressively happened to me in the past month, repressed memories surfacing. It does require trauma-informed intention and care in order to properly recall repressed memories. And I'll get into this a little bit in a moment, but because sometimes repressed memories, they surface without your intention, without you being like, I want to remember all the stuff that I've never remembered about my past. It's often what happens actually with repressed memories. They just kind of surface at certain times, they get activated. But also repressed memories can surface if you're actively engaging in healing, if you're in a therapeutic setting, like you're doing EMDR or something, or hypnosis, they can surface in those occasions as well. They can also surface in dreams, and they can just also surface during daily life activations. But when they do surface, this is what I was wanting to say. It's really important to understand about repressed memories, and this is why it's very important to handle the surfacing of repressed memories with trauma-informed practitioners and specialists. Some of the times they're very accurate, sometimes they're distorted, and sometimes they're a blend of true and distortion. Because the brain is highly suggestible, which means that memories can change. We're going to talk about this in a minute, but the way that your brain surfaces memories can change, can alter, meaning the actual memory can be altered depending on your state and your intention and the environment in which you're in and the state of your nervous system all affects like the accuracy of repressed memories surfacing. So again, your brain is really suggestible, which means that when you force memory retrieval, like especially in very suggestive settings, that can actually create false memories. And so that doesn't mean that the pain or the trauma is false, but it does mean that your nervous system doesn't need perfect recall to heal the real imprint of the trauma or the harm or the hurt or whatever. So Now let's talk about fragmentation and dissociation because they're kind of related. So under extreme stress, your brain can store memories in fragments, meaning a smell here, a flash of an image there, or like a wave of panic that just like comes out of nowhere. So that's fragmentation, okay? Dissociation is a sense of detachment from your body, the moment, or reality. And it's one way that your system protects you during trauma. It can be a trauma response. And it also means that the full narrative is never recorded because you're not present. You're not in your body. You're not present in your reality. So with all of that in mind, it's clear why that myth of like, I have to remember everything in order to heal everything doesn't have a solid foundation, because that's just not how trauma is stored and remembered. It's like you're asking your brain to do something that it really wasn't designed to do in the first place. The truth is your body does keep the score, right? Professor Vandal Crook was totally correct in that, but it doesn't store all the details like a storybook. Rather it's just like a set of survival patterns, of reflexes, of flashes, of fragments, emotional imprints. And that's actually a good thing, because it means that there are ways to heal that actually bypass the need for perfect, complete memory and reliving of the whole trauma. So now, because trauma isn't stored like a perfect video file that you can just play back and rewind on demand, that means that trying to force those missing frames back into place, okay, those missing pieces, trying to uncover them, force them back into your memory recall, isn't just unhelpful, it can be harmful, because there, again, are risks of forcing memory retrieval. That's something to be very mindful of, because forcing yourself to recall things that your brain, again, has wisely tucked away is a disservice to what your mind and your body are innately, intelligently doing for you. Sometimes it is helpful to work with, trauma-informed practitioners to recall more. Sometimes it's better just to work with the imprints, okay? And we'll talk about this more now. So let's talk about memory malleability, right? Neuroscience shows that every time we recall a memory, the brain fills in gaps with inference, with imagination, and suggestion, which means that like often without you realizing it, when you start pressing for details, your mind can unintentionally weave in false elements, right? There's even something called false memory syndrome, which is not about being dishonest or making things up, but it's actually just a state that reflects how the brain's reconstruction process actually works. And second, forcing memory retrieval, again, can cause retraumatization, which is when you basically relive a previous trauma and you become re-traumatized. And that's because the nervous system doesn't differentiate between the actual threat and vividly recalling the threat without enough safety in the present moment. And so if you re-enter a traumatic memory without nervous system capacity to process it, you're not actually healing yourself. You're just reinforcing the original trauma. And then that can worsen hypervigilance, can make avoidance worse, lead to emotional numbing. It's not great, okay? It's not great. Re-traumatization is not something that you want to do. So in other words, you're just practicing the trauma state, like you're not actually releasing it. You also need to be aware that there's also performance-based healing, right? That internalized belief that I can't heal until I remember everything so that I can heal everything. And that conscious or unconscious belief is what keeps people in that endless cycle of striving to remember or just like live in the past to heal the past, as if all of those missing details of the past are like the ticket to their liberation, when in reality, it's just an illusion of control, a way for the mind to make healing linear, to make it logical, to make it more certain. But healing trauma, again, it's not a trial where you have to turn in every piece of evidence. It's like healing trauma is a physiological, somatic, energetic recalibration that can happen without the mind ever getting the full script, so to speak. And that's actually a good thing, okay? Because when you stop forcing memory retrieval, you stop believing that you have to remember everything in order to heal everything. What happens is then you create space for your body to release what it's been carrying, sometimes, again, without the full story ever becoming conscious to you. And that's not only enough to heal, but again, it's often way more effective because you avoid being re-traumatized. You avoid, using more energy than is actually necessary to heal. And so if you're trying to remember everything, it's not actually required for your ability to truly heal. So let's talk about what is required. How does the nervous system actually release trauma without retrieving the full story and all the details? So there are four core mechanisms, we can call it practices as well, that can rewire and rewrite like your mind-body system, even if the details of your past and all your traumas remain a little fuzzy or they never surface at all. So the first core healing practice is just essentially nervous system regulation, which is also called bottom-up regulation. And I'm going to talk specifically about using the body to do this, okay? Because trauma is first and foremost a physiological state. It's really not a set of thoughts. And so according to polyvagal theory, when you shift from survival states like fight, flight, freeze, fawn into the ventral vagal state of safety and connection, your entire mind-body system reorganizes. That's why altering your physiology is often more transformative than just trying to think or cognitively process or talk your way into healing. So that means practices like somatic exercises, like breath work, and even environmental orientation tell your system to relax. That's nervous system regulation. And so when you do those nervous system regulation practices consistently over time, it creates what's called a neuroception of safety, meaning that's when your subconscious starts detecting that the world that you live in right now is safe instead of dangerous. And when your body feels safe, that's when new emotional learning and processing is possible. And that's when you can begin to heal. And so the second core healing practice is meaning making, and that's top-down regulation. So bottom-up regulation works through the body. Top-down regulation starts in the mind. And when you do that properly, it actually can reduce amygdala activation and increase prefrontal cortex regulation. That means calming your threat response without having to re-enter the traumatic memory. So meaning making is when you assign positive significance or meaning to the trauma in the present moment in order to help you reorient what happened so that you can begin to see the benefits of how you can grow and evolve from the trauma, how you can begin to heal, and what you gain from it, meaning what you learn in order to become a higher, more coherent version of yourself. So instead of like diving into what happened in the trauma and fleshing out all the details, trying to remember every single thing, you stay in the present moment, right? What's here for you right now? So for example, if you feel like your body tightening and you start to feel anxious, you could say to yourself, I'm feeling anxious, but this anxiety is passing because I'm learning to trust that I am safe in myself right now. The trauma is over and I'm learning to breathe more deeply into the safety of this moment and in myself. So that is meaning making, okay? Taking the symptom of trauma, the anxiety, and creating a positive meaning for it and telling yourself that you're safe in the moment. And so when you do that consistently, that small act, right? Like that took me, 20 seconds to say. That small act actually engages your brain's executive function that creates space then between you and the intensity of the trauma or the symptom of trauma. And then that actually downshifts your whole mind-body system without you having to reopen the wounds and revisit the trauma. So now let's talk about somatic exercises alongside implicit memory updating specifically, which is the third core healing practice. So not all memory is explicit, like I said before, and verbal and conscious. Like much of trauma is stored as implicit memory, right? Patterns of muscle tension, breathing, posture, reflexes, emotions, etc. So somatic therapies like somatic experiencing, simple somatic exercises, there's something called tension and trauma release exercising, or TRE. There are many types of mindful movement practices that directly reprogram those implicit memory patterns. So key aspects for somatic therapies that help reprogram implicit memory patterns are titration, which is approaching sensations in small, manageable doses, okay? Pendulation, which is gently moving between discomfort and comfort. There's resourcing, which is anchoring yourself in safety cues first before you start doing any sort of healing work. And then there's regulating micro movements that actually discharge stored survival and trauma energy in your body. So those are all key aspects of somatic experiencing that helps with reprogramming implicit memories. There's really compelling evidence that people can resolve long-standing trauma symptoms like chronic pain, panic attacks, even long-standing digestive issues without ever recalling the details of the original abuse trauma event, but rather just from their body learning a new pattern of regulation through a somatic experiencing or mindful movements that I described. Again, even if the details of the trauma stay unknown. So the final and the fourth healing practice is reconsolidation and memory updating. So your brain doesn't just store memories, it can update them. So memory reconsolidation means that when a memory is briefly activated, you can modify it if you are in the right state of mind and if you are emotionally open and regulated. So that means you can introduce new safety cues or new interpretations during memory updating that actually reduces the emotional charge and the feeling of the trauma and the storing of the trauma or the memory of the trauma. And that works even when the memory is incomplete or even if it's symbolic. So that means you can work with like a fragment of a memory, like a smell, a physical sensation, an emotion, or even like a dream image that represents the imprint of the trauma. And that happens because when you integrate that fragment with the new safe narrative or positive interpretation and present moment safety, your brain then actually can rewrite the memory, especially if you repeat the process and there is positive emotional, productive emotional release that happens. So again, that means that your nervous system doesn't need like the conscious details of the plot line of your trauma. It just needs you to create present day safety. And you can do that by actually rewriting the memory. And that's also part of neuroplasticity. So when you integrate those four healing mechanisms, right? Bottom-up regulation, top-down regulation, somatic implicit memory updating, and memory reconsolidation, you can heal. And you can heal without needing perfect recollection in order to establish present-day nervous system safety. And that means that your nervous system is no longer running on the patterns and programs of past trauma. And your body, your mind, and even your energy field can transform without ever piecing together the whole narrative. So that means missing memories are not actually a barrier to your ability to heal that so many of us have been taught, right, to fear and to force. Because your body, your energy field, and your subconscious are actually already naturally working together to heal collectively without that need for perfect memory recall. That's how you're already designed. Your nervous system is constantly scanning for cues of safety or for threat. Okay, so when you practice consistent bottom-up safety signals through breath work, through somatic exercises, through gentle movement, through grounding, loving self-touch, you literally tell your autonomic nervous system, I'm safe right now. This moment is safe. And when you do that repeatedly and productively over time, those inputs do rewrite implicit memory. So instead of defaulting to freezing, collapsing, hypervigilance, your body learns to rest, to digest, to connect to the present moment through safety. Now, you're not erasing the trauma per se, but you are essentially installing like a new operating system that essentially makes the old operating system irrelevant. Now, from a biophysics perspective, okay, the heart and the brain both emit measurable electromagnetic fields. This is the energy field aspect of what I was saying. So chronic trauma states create incoherent patterns, right? That's basically just like static at a radio signal, okay? And so those incoherent patterns, they shape how you interpret the world, how you perceive others, and how then others perceive you. So coherence practices, which are practices to bring your heart, your mind, your body, your soul into sync, into harmony, like breath work, like mindfulness, meditation techniques, the practices that I've already mentioned, they don't just change how you feel, they change what your entire system perceives and understands about the present moment. And so a regulated, coherent field, right? Mind, body, heart, soul, interprets things no longer as like a threat and starts to interpret things more coherently. And so that's what makes you feel less reactive, less hypervigilant, and more healthy or more regulated, more peaceful, because your mind, your body, your heart, and your soul are speaking the same language. They're not stuck in survival. They have released, reprogrammed the fear response, the implicit trauma patterning, and you're free in the moment to be harmonious because you've cultivated that through present consciousness, coherence, and safety. And so your subconscious is where emotional patterns and conditioning is stored, and sometimes what psychologists call implicit associations. So you don't need to consciously revisit the trauma to change those associations. You can actually change the patterns the moment that they activate by pairing the activation with a new safe experience. So that can happen through techniques like EMDR, through hypnotherapy, through self-hypnosis, through guided visualizations, through theta meditations, because what you're doing is you're tapping into your subconscious, and then you're just creating neuroplasticity through rewriting the old trauma activation by giving it a new story, giving it a new imprint, giving it new meaning, releasing the emotional charge and replacing it with safety. And so that's what memory reconsolidation is like in the process. And that just means your brain updates the meaning of what happened, the emotional charge, the imprint. And so the old pain and the trauma loses its grip because you've replaced the pattern with a new pattern of safety and peace and harmony and meaning, positive meaning to be specific. So essentially, healing requires and is about creating new safety patterns in the present moment, not necessarily reactivating every single old threat and trauma and reliving it. You know, your nervous system does not heal by replaying the past and digging through it in order to get to every single detail, you know, because that's actually dysregulating. It heals by learning that it's no longer in the trauma, that the trauma is over, the danger has passed, and the past is in the past. And so whether that's through somatic experiencing, energetic work, top-down regulation, subconscious reprogramming, the point is that you have to give your whole mind, body, soul system lived experiences of presence and safety in the present moment that then reprograms that old trauma circuitry until it becomes irrelevant. So when you understand that that's what healing is about, right? Installing, reprogramming new safety patterns in the present, not actually excavating every single old trauma and threat loop or program or event, then something radical can happen, right? You start seeing the absence of perfect or complete memory as a deficiency, and you start seeing it as your body's innate wisdom, which is what it is. This is where reframing becomes not just helpful, but profoundly important and empowering, because there's not something wrong with you because you can't remember everything about your past. And this is something that I've personally reconciled with, very recently. It's understanding that there's a reason that I repressed all of that severe trauma, because it was very overwhelming for me as a child. And I don't need to recall everything in detail in order to heal. There's a wisdom to why my mind and my body automatically repressed those traumatic events. The inability to recall every traumatic detail is actually a sign that your survival systems are working as they are designed. So you have to remember that the brain's hippocampus, again, the part of your brain that's responsible for organizing memories, it goes offline during extreme stress, so that your amygdala can keep you alive. And so that's the automatic survival response. The forgetting isn't actually a flaw. It's actually a brilliant life-preserving strategy. And so the body remembers enough to protect you in the moment, and then it stores the rest in implicit memory where it can't overwhelm you in your daily life. And so you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes in order to heal. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Healing is a process of nervous system regulation and reorganization and the rewiring of those patterns so that your body can run and function and your brain can function without those old patterns of threat and danger. So when you focus on prioritizing present safety with mind, body, heart, and soul coherence, that's when healing becomes way easier, way more effective, and far less stressful, and way less re-traumatizing, and also shorter, okay? Because it's just more productive to heal this way. The nervous system heals when it can predict safety in the present moment, meaning in the here and now, not when it has like a perfect recall of the past. So you have to trust that your mind-body system is going to reveal exactly what is needed for your healing and your integration. No more, no less. And so if a memory or an image surfaces, it's because your brain believes that you have the resources and the ability to regulate and process that without collapsing. And if it doesn't, there's nothing wrong with you. That's not a flaw. That's actually precision, okay? It's intentional. And so healing trauma isn't about forcing the vault of your past open and excavating it. It's actually about trusting the timing of your own internal mind-body intelligence. Here's what most people don't understand is that present moment safety and safe connection can actually overwrite past trauma's operating system. Again, without having to retrieve all of the details of the original file. So in neuroscience terms, the prefrontal cortex, the rational, integrative part of your brain comes online when you feel safe, when your brain, your body experience felt safety. And that's what allows memory reconsolidation to happen naturally, when old threat associations actually dissolve and then are then replaced by new, safe, regulated ones. You have to think of this like upgrading your computer's operating system. It's kind of exactly like the same thing. Like you don't need to open every single file and reread it in order to upgrade your operating system. You can just install the new operating system and that will rewrite the old one. And those old files are still there, but they're not dictating how your computer actually works. And so you have to think of your relationships, your environment, your own healing practices that way. They have to become the new operating system that your nervous system, your brain, and your body learn to trust, learn to regulate themselves to. So you can stop fearing what you can't remember, essentially, and you can start leveraging what you can create and do for yourself now in this moment, which is to create coherence, create meaningful connection, create safety in the present moment, and to regulate yourself. And that's what reprograms your mind over time. That's what regulates your nervous system. That's what reprograms your nervous system. And that's what stops trauma from running your life. That's what gives you your power back and what actually liberates you from your past more effectively, more productively without re-traumatization. So here's your action step for the week. If and when an old fear or anxiety as a trauma symptom surfaces, I want you to take a few minutes just to ground yourself in the present moment, in the safety of the present moment, through breath work and through self-touch. So that means you place one hand on your heart, you place your other hand on your belly, and you take slow, deep breaths from your belly, not your chest. So that means inhaling for 4 seconds, holding your breath for 4 seconds ideally, and then exhaling for 8 seconds. And as you breathe, I want you to bring your full attention to the sensation, to the feeling of your hands resting on your body, meaning on your heart, on your belly. And then I want you to say internally or out loud, the past is in the past. In this moment, I am safe, I am free. My nervous system is learning to relax. I am learning to breathe deeply because in this moment, I am safe and I am free. And I want you to do that every single time you feel activated by an old fear, if anxiety as a trauma symptom surfaces, or you're just like feeling overwhelmed when old emotions arise. And I want you to do that every single time because it takes just a few minutes. And so you don't need a ton of space or a ton of time to actually fully release that imprint in the moment. And when you do that repeatedly, that very simple practice actually begins to retrain your nervous system to reorganize around safety in the moment, which is then going to rewire the trauma's imprint that activated without you having to go back, revisit the past, and become re-traumatized. And so I hope this episode gives you permission to relax into the present moment in your healing, because so many of us have been conditioned to believe that we need to rehash everything from our past and heal every single traumatic memory in order to fully heal. And that's just, it's not true. It's actually exhausting and it's not entirely productive because we forget that the past is in the past. And we do need to heal what we need to heal, but we can heal more simply and way more effectively when we teach our bodies that we're safe in the present moment, that we can relax. And in that relaxation, when we practice regulation and presence, and we learn to trust that we can heal more easily and with love. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope this episode awakened you, inspired you, and reminded you of what's possible when you love, heal, and free yourself and reclaim your highest truth and power. If this show has transformed or enlightened your self-love, growth, and healing journey, please like, save, and share this episode and leave a positive review on Apple or Spotify. And subscribe to be reminded of new episodes. Your support is deeply appreciated and truly helps this show so much. And if today's episode resonated with you, don't stop here. Go deeper. My book, Unconditional, You Are Perfect As You Are, expands on these teachings and gives you the missing framework about self-love that no one is talking about. So get your copy today to start reading and loving yourself more. And if you're ready for the ultimate healing journey with daily instruction and guidance from me, I'd love to see you inside the Source membership, the only holistic and comprehensive step-by-step self-healing program that is proven to work. Remember, you were never meant to struggle or wait for what is already yours. It's time to claim everything you want and more. All the links are in the show notes. I'll see you next time.